Be reading, if you will stand, from Psalm 140. Deliver me, O Lord, from evil men. Preserve me from violent men, who plan evil things in their heart and stir up wars continually. They make their tongue sharp as a serpent's, and under their lips is the venom of asps. Guard me, O Lord, from the hands of the wicked. Preserve me from violent men, who have planned to trip up my feet. The arrogant have hidden a trap for me, and with cords they have spread a net. Beside the way they set snares for me. I say to the Lord, You are my God. Give ear to the voice of my pleas for mercy, O Lord. O Lord, my Lord, the strength of my salvation, you have covered my head in the day of battle. Grant not, O Lord, the desire of the wicked. Do not further their evil plot, or they will be exalted. As for the head of those who surround me, let the mischief of their lips overwhelm them. Let burning coals fall upon them. Let them be cast into the fire, into miry pits, no more to rise. Let not the slanderer be established in the land. Let evil hunt down the violent man speedily. I know that the Lord will maintain the cause of the afflicted and will execute justice for the needy. Surely the righteous shall give thanks to your name. The upright shall dwell in your presence. Father, we're grateful for your word. I pray that as we look at it now and discuss it, take it into our hearts, and pray that it transforms us, that you would be here, be present with us, and by your Spirit accomplish all those things. So indeed, open our hearts and our eyes, Lord, to see and to feel what your word has for us, and then to make it alive by the power of your Spirit. So guide us today and bless us with your presence, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. He has told you, O man, what is good. What does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. I suppose this has been quoted more in the last 3 weeks. Pastors, memes cited on Facebook posts, quoted in commentaries, than probably most of us have heard for years. True for me. And, typically I get agitated. It kind of annoys me as a person who's steeped in the Bible when there's all of a sudden Bible verses being thrown around. I feel like people don't know what this means, don't care about it in a regular context, don't usually care much to look at the Bible, and now all of a sudden it shows up. This one I don't mind circulating right now. This I think is right. This I think is helpful. This I'm really glad to see entering into the public dialogue in a more healthy way than most Bible verses usually show up. I think there's a good reason for this, and I'm glad it's an appropriate centerpiece to hold on to in the national and global conversation. It's difficult to be reminded that this is your standard, that this is what God's people ought to be about. It's easy, really easy, to hear the verse and then say, yep, got it, and then not to take it seriously. Which I feel like not only does that happen too much, I feel like I'm guilty of it, and I'm sick of being guilty of it. And also it's my job to hold us accountable so that we're not guilty of it. Now, I'm glad this is a verse that's penetrating and circulating in people's minds right now. I'm glad it's part of the conversation. I wish we could talk about it. I wish we could use it, deploy this verse, to talk about these ideas the way Micah was talking about them. Which is to say, Micah showed up to a people who knew this to be true, who knew what these words meant, and laid this on them and said, you need to live up to your own standard, the standard you're well aware of. What the words mean, you know. And he shows up and says, here's what God expects you to do with it, and you need to now own up to the truth you already have in front of you. I wish we could do that. That's what Isaiah did. That's what Micah is doing here. Prophets were obsessed with justice. And they were preoccupied that it be applied in a personal way by people who were God's followers. But they had the luxury, if you can say anything that a prophet experienced was a luxury, they had the advantage of telling these truths to a people who understood what the words meant. I feel like we can't use it that way. I want to talk about justice and kindness and humility, but we have to reset and go further back from where the prophets were able to start. We have to start at the foundation of explaining what the words mean before we can even call people to live up to the standard. That's frustrating, but I think we can do it. So that's what I want to focus on today. Humans are uniquely sort of created with a desire to see justice done. They know there's a right outcome, and maybe more than that, they know when they see something that's not right, and that bothers humans in a way it doesn't bother the rest of creation. I'm not even sure angels get that exercised about this, right? They're curious about these things, Peter tells us. They desire to look into these things, but I'm not sure they're overly concerned with making sure justice is done on the earth, because they're heavenly beings. They're kind of baffled by what goes on the earth. Now, they participate in it. They're messengers between the two realms. They have influence over it in some way. But I'm not so sure they even are preoccupied in the way that humans are designed to be by God. The problem is, neither are animals, by the way. They don't give two rips about justice. Their day is about staying alive and destroying anything that threatens you staying alive. They don't care if you unjustly, they don't care that you unjustly have attacked their group. They just care that their group might die because of what you did. They don't care to punish. They will kill just because it's survival. Humans care, but humans are also uniquely prone to distort or ignore principles of justice. So it's we're not angels. We're right in the middle. We're in the mud. We're in the middle of it. Like, we're dirt creatures. So we have to concern ourselves with what goes on this dirt planet. But we're not animals either. So we can't care. We care more than animals do, but we can't quite live up to the standard of angels. So we're stuck. We're bad at the thing we're most created to seek. It's a bad situation. So let me lay out a couple of things to focus on, how I think we should tackle this. First one I've already said, this is going to be actually the easiest part of the task, but it's really important to do, which is to define properly what it is we're talking about from a biblical perspective. If you can't operate from a biblical definition, then we won't have much to say in the broader conversation, because we'll either accept the terms that are being given to us and contributing to a falsehood, or we'll just be slinging out platitudes, which won't do anybody any good. All right? So we'll define what we're talking about, hopefully from the Bible's perspective. Secondly, we have to decide just whether or not we're going to be the type of people who care about this, who participate in it. And then we're going to have to determine not only that we're going to do it, that we're going to try to participate, but that we're going to do it with the particular type of character, with grace, that should identify God's people, followers of Jesus. So these are my three goals. They look simple right there. But in the time we're dealing with now, I just have to admit, on a personal note, it's really not a simple thing. It's a heavy burden to stand up and try to engage in this conversation, which is so big and so deep and so difficult, and first of all, anything you say can be misconstrued and will be misconstrued. But you still have to say things to try to get to the truth. Secondly, it's a burden because you can't have this conversation without I'm talking about anybody, the most raging atheist who is ready to burn the system down for the sake of justice cannot actually have the conversation unless he starts from a theistic perspective, that there is a God who defines such things, or some standard we've started from. And none of this matters unless people assume the Bible's emphasis on mankind as God's image on the earth. If you don't understand God having made man in his image, which gives him a distinct value in the universe, then what do you even mean? We can't even have the conversation. You can't even raise the issue unless you've accepted the terms that there is an objective standard by which everything else must be measured, and that people must have some intrinsic value that is eternal and infinite, infinitely precious. And if you start talking to me about justice and you haven't accepted those terms, then you're not talking about justice. I don't know what you're talking about. There can only be a just standard to return to if people are worth it. But they can't be worth it because they're born. They have to be given that value. They have to be given that worth because God made them with that value. So we have to determine just how we're going to go about this. Let me take us back carefully as I can, but there's too much here way too much to unpack in full. But let me see if I can take us through a sort of summary version of helping you get some ground under you to say, I know what I'm talking about now. Now we can go out and have these discussions. Deuteronomy 18:3. This is an obscure reference, but it's going to help us lay the foundation. This will be the priest's due from the people. This is basically how the people are going to sustain and provide for the Kohanim, the priesthood, who do not have their own land allocated and who aren't able to make a living the way other Israelites would make a living. So the people's job, the people's responsibility was to give them their sustenance, to take care of them by giving them their due. But this word here is actually the Hebrew word for justice, mishpat. This is the priest's mishpat. Sounds odd, you wouldn't say it that way, right? This is the priest's justice. It's not a cosmic principle in this context, right? It is simply the payment that's appropriate to give in the situation you're talking about to the people who have a certain right to it, right? It is their due. It is their appropriate recompense or their payment. This, I think, helps to make it concrete rather than just an abstract idea we're trying to reach up for. This puts it on the ground and says, if there is material provision in this case that is appropriate to render, that would be justice. That's an example of a just outcome in a situation that none of us thinks is, like, this isn't a legal definition so much as an ethical one. And the ethical standard here is not all that high to reach for, right? Like, this is their job, their status accrues to them the right to get these pieces of meat. But that's justice in a very concrete, rather simple, everyday situation. That should be helpful because oftentimes when we start the conversation, we're talking about a sort of abstract idea in the universe. This helps understand, I think, better that it is a general payment due. So the priest has a certain status that makes their material provision a just payment to be given to them. Humans generally, in the same way, but just stretching it out to all humanity generally, every person, because they're made in God's image, is due a certain basic level of right treatment, right? Respect, honor, just because they're human. That's justice. That's where you have to start from for this conversation to make sense. Deuteronomy 16, very important section of Scripture in terms of laying out a societal standard for how to implement a just society if you're trying to build one from the ground up, right? And now the Hebrew Bible, understand, is instrumental, it's pivotal in framing and shaping most of what we in the Western world understand as a just legal system. Most of our legal principles are grounded in some way or another in ideas that came out of the Hebrew Scriptures. This is as important as any of those when you get to start talking about not just the legal structures that a society builds up, but an ethical one. We'll get to this. Deuteronomy 16, verse 18, you shall appoint judges and officers in all your towns that the Lord your God is giving you, according to your tribes. So they're going to be local, interestingly. That's important, right? Before this, in history, you have sort of tribal affiliations, but you don't, and you have law codes and stuff. But this is really narrowing everything down for a set of rules that God himself will tell how to build a society that's right, that's based on the rightness that conforms to his character. So in your tribes, they shall judge the people with righteous judgment. You shall not pervert justice. You shall not show partiality, and you shall not accept a bribe. For a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and subverts the cause of the righteous. Justice, and only justice, you shall follow, that you may live and inherit the land that the Lord your God is giving you. So you see something here that's important. I won't do this in depth, but the combination of these two terms you have here, righteous judgment, that's two Hebrew words that you will see paired together all the time in the Hebrew Bible, all the time. Tzedek, righteous, or tzedekah, righteousness, and mishpat, justice. Righteousness and justice frequently go together. They're married throughout most of the Hebrew Bible. That's an important principle here. It's getting at not just a legal standard, which is what this is doing. It's setting up a way to run a society with some sense of legal objectivity. But it's important that the legal definitions there have to be based on they have to have a moral tone to them, a moral foundation underneath them, which conform to God's character. So what we call righteousness, we might think of as more of a moral assessment, a moral term. Mishpat, justice, would usually be picking up something of a legal definition, but please don't make the mistake of thinking those are separate. They can never be separated. And if they are, the community trying to implement them on totally separate lines is going to run into a problem. So, tzedek and mishpat, righteous judgment. There are three specific warnings here. First of all, it's just important that they're warnings. As he's saying, here's how you do it. Notice the first method he employs to lay that out for them. Don't do this, right? I know a lot of parents like to talk about their positive parenting and how you're supposed to only speak affirming words to your kids and how, right, like saying negative things can damage their fragile psyches and things like this. I'm sorry to be, I don't mean to be pejorative about this, but I'm just saying plenty of important principles God teaches to his children. He starts with, do not do this. Do not do it this way. Why would he do that? Why does he have to start with warning what not to do? Because he knows that we're terrible at doing the right things. So he says, look, here is what I'm going to give you. I'm going to give you the building blocks for a just society. And since I know you're going to be so terrible because of your human nature and your fallen state at actually doing it proscriptively, proactively, prescriptively, I'm going to tell you a bunch of things to not do right away because I know that's the thing you're going to be immediately inclined to do. But he gives three things, and this is really, really important. They're simple. They'll be self-evident. I'm not going to explain them all. But just look at what he says here. Do not turn aside, literally there is to turn aside justice or pervert it. The word here is something like either to bend it out of the shape it's supposed to be or bend it away from the direction it's supposed to go in, or possibly to just don't turn away from it or cause people to turn away from it, right? So a chance for justice comes to you and you essentially ignore it. I think this would be getting mainly at the impulse to be a coward in the face of the opportunity to do what's right, right? I think that's what it mainly is at mind here. Secondly, do not show partiality. The phrase here is literally do not recognize faces. Do not acknowledge someone's face when you go to execute justice. That's not a problem of courage. It's a problem of favoritism. Don't look at someone who is pleading, whose cause needs to be pleaded, whose case needs to be made on their behalf, and don't consider anything about them other than they have a case that needs to be advocated for. That's foundational to any system that's going to actually implement justice. Very often in the Hebrew Bible, justice is going to be applied on the behalf of the poor. That's usually the way it comes out. Often enough, what you'll hear are appeals for the orphan, right, the fatherless, the widow. and the poor. Those are specific marginalized groups, disadvantaged groups within a given society, within a particularly ancient Israelite society. But I don't think that is the only place you can apply this, right? We should think in terms of any person whose status is being considered, whether it's socioeconomic, whether it's racial, whether it is ethnic, whether it is nationality, whether it's male or female, right? All of these categories that we talked about last week a little bit with ethnos, they're from this place, their skin is this color, they have less than I do, all of that is in the ballpark here. So if you regard their face, you've already started to leave the path of justice because you're thinking about something beyond just what the right thing to do here is. So don't show favoritism. Certain types of relationships are more likely to render certain types of outcomes, right? That's human nature. If my brother is accused of something, I'm going to tend to take his side just because he's my brother, like my biological brother. This has actually happened before, so I'm talking from experience. It's a challenge to say, if you're a family member or a child goes astray, that I'm sorry, you have to face the music. I cannot defend you just because I'm acknowledging your face, right? That would be a perversion of justice. And then finally, the most obvious one perhaps, but really dangerous here, do not accept a bribe. A bribe, it blinds the eyes. In other words, even a person who has the wisdom is astute enough to discern what the right thing to do is. That's its own problem, right? Just lacking the discernment to tell what's the right thing to do. But even a person with that ability, if they can personally gain from rendering one judgment over another, their wisdom isn't going to do any good in terms of providing a just outcome. It's a real danger. So we think of a bribe like, oh, of course I would never take a bribe. I have more integrity than that. We have to be careful. In any sort of situation, we're trying to figure out what's the right thing here. It may not be someone handing you an envelope of cash. That's what we think of when we think bribe. It could just be, if I decide this way and this person benefits, there might be, down the line, another way that they can help me in some other way. That's still a material benefit that I could get. They didn't hand me an envelope full of money, but it still might be a danger that I should consider my own personal gain, my own personal stake in the outcome. The Bible warns pretty starkly against that, so it's an important little triad here. The final verse in this little section, verse 20, is absolutely foundational. I have long ago put this to mind and heart just to keep coming back to it, and precisely for times such as these, where everyone is talking about justice, but I have a hard time sorting out what are we talking about here. I don't know of a better sort of fallback, baseline, working definition that I can always take heart in. I can always get my feet back on terra firma and say, I know what should be the discussion here. It's Deuteronomy 16:20. And I'm going to work this out just one statement at a time and move through this verse. Justice, justice is the way this reads in the Hebrew. It just repeats the word twice. Tzedakah, tzedakah. It's not actually the word for justice we'd normally use. It's the righteousness word. But in the context, you can see the focus here is societal, legal, ethical standards of running a just society. So all translations of this that I've found or that I've looked into, I'm not sure about all of them that exist, but basically all your major translations will just say this is talking about justice. The word is righteousness, but you see why they're combined. But all it does is repeat it. So most translations will say justice, something like justice and only justice. Or you could understand this as pursue justice justly. That would make sense. There are different ways you can render what's going on in the Hebrew here. It's all good. It's all fine. The translations are all pretty good. They get at the heart of this. I have just settled on, I think the most helpful is actually just to leave it the way the Hebrew reads. Justice, justice is what you should pursue. It doesn't make sense, but it adds impact. Part of the repetition of Hebrew words is precisely to add emphasis. And it has the effect of doing that, but it also highlights that it is this and it is this, which has the benefit for us in our time of screening out a bunch of other things that people might come to define justice as, right? This is why, and I understand why people do it, and I don't have a huge problem with it, but it's why it's a problem to start adding adjectives to justice. Social justice, economic justice, environmental justice, racial justice. If someone wants to, for the sake of conversation, say, hey, we really should talk about social justice or racial justice, I have no problem with that. I don't have a huge, that doesn't make me angry because you said it that way. I get that. I think people who get angry about the way people use language conversationally probably need to calm down a bit and be willing to have the conversation and just discuss it in the conversation. But when it turns into a slogan, right? If you're just screaming about social justice, that's not an invitation to a conversation. So that already sets me on a bad footing, because I'm not sure you actually want to discuss the principle of justice. Once you've added the adjective, I also know you're probably thinking of something, some sort of outcome applied to a particular type of group, right? Social justice usually means justice on behalf of disadvantaged people, which is what the Bible's consumed with. But if by it you mean that we have to specially consider people who have less materially, then you're starting to already shift what the standard actually ought to be. And I think just this verse does a good deal to help us keep our feet planted and say, if you want to discuss justice, I think believers of all people should be willing to do that, eager to do that. But it has to be justice. Real justice, true justice. Sometimes this will be rendered. I think that's what we're talking about here. Unalloyed. You can't mix it with anything and then say it's justice. Jude and I have been reading together from the Lord of the Rings, which I know I talk about a lot, and you guys probably are like, can you find another place to draw illustrations from? But look, it's just penetrated my psyche. What can I say? This profound and beautifully written, very concise, very brief, but very profound scene where the great, not the great big evil bad guy, but the sort of most powerful and wise wizard who is subsumed under his cause, right? Sauron, where he has been corrupted, unbeknownst to anyone else. He was the greatest and most wise of the council, and he was the one everyone was looking to for answers, but he had already been corrupted long ago. He turned to the dark side, to use another metaphor from a pop culture reference I draw from sometimes too. And he's confronted by Gandalf. And in the middle of the realization, Gandalf realizes his robes, he's Sauron the White, but his robes are no longer white. They're multicolored in a way that still appeared to be white, but when you look closer, they were shimmering, they were colorful, there was a subtlety to a subtle decoration, a subtle color to them that he had never noticed before. And he comments on it, and Sauron says what he scorns at what used to be, right? It used to be white. It was pure. He was wise. He had a truly special status. But now he had been corrupted. And it's fascinating, and this is the brilliance of it. The corruption does not reveal itself in ugliness. It reveals itself with a beautiful subtlety that you don't notice until you're right up close to it. And his response is, white, that's just a starting point. It's good for certain things, but it can be overwritten, sort of implying it should be changed. Since it's a blank slate, right? This is the beauty of white. You have a white page, you can write anything you want on it. And he sees this as a progressive advance in what white should be. He's turned it into this beautiful thing that it wasn't before. At which point Gandalf's response is, then it has ceased to be white. Everything that's good about that blank slate, to try to make it more than it is to corrupt it. And he has this great line, trying to get Jude to memorize. Do you remember what he says to Sauron? No, okay. He who breaks a thing to find out what it is has left the path of wisdom. If you take justice and your goal is to achieve justice, but you redefine it in order to get to it, you no longer have justice. If you set out to achieve justice by unjust means, if you're looking for just ends, but you're using unjust means to get there, it has ceased to be justice you're fighting for.